The stars had been burning for billions of years, but for the last 300, they had watched the same thing happen over and over again. A fleet of dark ships would arrive at a world. The people there would fight back with everything they had, and then they would lose. The ships belonged to the Korthek Empire. They were not the biggest ships in the galaxy, and they were not the fastest. But they carried warriors that no one could hurt. Every Korthek soldier wore a shield made of pure energy that wrapped around their body like invisible armor. Nothing could get through it. Nothing. The people of Zarian Prime had tried plasma cannons that could melt steel in seconds. The energy just bounced off the shields like rain off a window. The warriors of Belus 9 had shot missiles that could destroy mountains. The shields absorbed every explosion without even flickering. The desperate defenders of New Terra had used beam weapons that could cut through starship hulls. The shields turned the deadly light into harmless sparks. Every world fell the same way. First came the fear. Then came the fighting. Then came the silence. Commander Zeftai stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the data streams flowing across the holographic displays. His pale blue skin had the slight glow that marked him as pure Korthek bloodline. His forearms moved with practiced ease as he checked the reports from his science teams. Behind him, 300 ships waited for his orders. "Commander," said Science Officer Velanara, her voice carrying the respectful tone that all lesser ranks used when speaking to their superiors, "the target system analysis is complete." Zeftai turned to face her. Like all Korthek, Velanara was tall and thin, with large dark eyes that could see much more than human eyes could. Her own 4 arms held data tablets that showed information about their next target. "Report," Zeftai commanded. "The 3rd planet from the star contains the species designated as humans," Velanara said, reading from her tablet. "Population approximately 8 billion. They have achieved basic faster-than-light travel within the last 50 years, but their technology remains primitive by galactic standards." She touched the tablet, and a 3-dimensional image of a blue and green world appeared in the air between them. Their weapons are kinetic projectiles, early plasma technology, and basic explosives. Their fastest ships barely reach .2 light speed. They have no shield technology beyond basic metal armor. Zeftai studied the spinning image of the planet. It looked peaceful from space, with white clouds swirling over blue oceans and brown continents. He had seen many worlds like this one. They all looked peaceful from space. "Estimated resistance level?" he asked. "Minimal," Velanara replied. "Their weapons cannot penetrate our shields. Our previous encounters with similar technology levels suggest complete conquest within 72 standard hours." Zeftai nodded. "This would be routine. The humans would fight because all species fought. When faced with conquest, they would throw everything they had at the Korthak fleet. Their weapons would prove useless against shields that had protected Korthak warriors for 3 centuries. Then they would surrender, and another world would join the Empire, the Shield. Technology was the foundation of Korthak power. Each shield generator was a masterpiece of engineering that could analyze any incoming attack in microseconds. When a bullet came toward a Korthak warrior, the shield would scan its speed, mass, and trajectory. Then it would create an exact counterforce to stop the bullet completely. When an energy beam struck the shield, it would analyze the frequency and power level, then generate an opposite wave that canceled out the attack perfectly. The shields never failed because they adapted to everything. Every new weapon that other species created just became another frequency for the shields to analyze and counter. The more advanced the attack, the better the shields worked. Zeftai remembered his first battle, 30 years ago on the mining world of Korish 7. He had been a young warrior then, nervous about facing enemy fire for the first time. His training instructor had told him to trust the shield, but fear was hard to overcome. When the first plasma bolt struck his energy barrier, he had flinched and waited for pain that never came. The shield absorbed the energy so completely that he had not even felt the impact. After that day, HFY had walked through 100 battlefields without fear. Bullets bounced off him like pebbles thrown at a starship. Explosions washed over him like gentle breezes. Energy weapons struck his shield and vanished like shadows touched by light. The other species in the galaxy feared the Korthik not because they were cruel, though they could be when needed. They feared them because fighting a Korthak warrior was like fighting a force of nature. You could shoot at a mountain with every weapon you owned, but the mountain would still be there when you ran out of ammunition. Begin the approach, HFY ordered. Standard conquest formation. Deploy screening ships first to test their response capabilities. Yes, Commander, Velinara said, and began touching controls on her tablet. All around the flagship, the fleet began to move. The great ships turned toward the blue world like predators focusing on prey. Their engines created streams of light that stretched across space as they accelerated toward their target. HFY watched the tactical display show the progress of his ships. Soon they would reach the human homeworld. The humans would see them coming and prepare to fight. They would gather their primitive weapons and make brave speeches about defending their planet. They would tell each other that they could win, that they could find a way to defeat enemies that 300 years of galactic warfare had failed to stop. And then they would learn what every other species had learned. Nothing could penetrate a Korthik shield. Nothing at all. The warning came from the Deep Space Monitoring Station near Jupiter. A young technician named Sarah Mills was drinking her third cup of coffee when the screens lit up with contacts that should not have existed. 300 ships had appeared at the edge of the solar system, moving toward Earth at impossible speeds. This has to be a mistake, Sarah whispered to herself as she ran the scans again. But the numbers stayed the same. 300 ships, each one bigger than anything humanity had ever built, were coming straight for her home. Within minutes, every government on Earth knew about the visitors. Emergency meetings began in every capital city. Military commanders dusted off plans that everyone had hoped would never be needed. Scientists tried to understand technology that seemed to break the laws of physics. Admiral Chen Rodriguez stood in the command center of the Earth Defense Fleet headquarters and stared at the tactical display. Humanity had 68 combat ships scattered across the solar system. They were good ships, built with the best technology humans could create. But they looked like toys compared to the alien fleet. What do we know about them? Admiral Rodriguez, Ashtar Intelligence Officer. Nothing good, ma'am, Commander Jackson replied. He was a thin man with gray hair, who had spent his whole career preparing for this moment, without believing it would ever come. They're not responding to any communication attempts. They're not broadcasting any signals we can understand. They're just coming toward us in perfect formation. Admiral Rodriguez looked at the display again. The alien ships moved like they owned space itself, confident and unstoppable. She had fought in 3 different wars during her career, but she had never faced an enemy that felt so completely alien. Send a message, she ordered. A transmission went out to every human ship in space. It was simple and direct. Defend Earth. Use everything we have. Captain Maria Santos received the order while her ship, the USS Defiance, was patrolling near Mars. She was 32 years old and had never fired a shot in anger, but she had trained for this her entire career. Her ship carried the newest weapons humanity had developed, railguns that could accelerate metal slugs to incredible speeds, plasma cannons that burned hotter than the surface of the sun, and missiles with nuclear warheads. All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez, came the voice over the communication system. The enemy fleet will reach Earth in 6 hours. We will engage them at maximum range and make them pay for every meter of space. The human fleet moved to intercept the aliens. Every ship humanity could get into space rushed toward the battle. Military vessels, cargo ships with weapons bolted onto their hulls, even civilian craft that had volunteered to fight. It was everything Earth had. The two fleets met in the space between Mars and Earth. Captain Santos watched through her ship's cameras as the first human missiles streaked toward the alien vessels. The weapons moved faster than anything humans had ever built, carrying enough explosive power to level cities. The missiles struck the alien ships and vanished. There were no explosions, no damage, no effect at all. The deadly weapons simply disappeared against the dark hulls like they had never existed. What just happened? Santos asked her weapons officer. "I don't know, Captain," Lieutenant Kim replied, staring at his instruments. "The missiles hit them dead on, but there's no damage reading. It's like they absorbed the entire explosion." More human ships opened fire. Railgun slugs moving at 30 kilometers per second struck the alien vessels and bounced off like pebbles. Plasma beams that could cut through asteroid rock hit the enemy ships and scattered into harmless light. Nuclear explosions that should have vaporized anything within 1,000 kilometers created pretty flashes that did absolutely nothing. The alien ships did not even slow down. Then the aliens fired back. Beams of purple energy reached across space and touched human ships. Where the beams hit, metal turned to gas and people turned to nothing. The UE's courage disappeared in a flash of light. The UE's determination broke apart like a toy stepped on by a giant. The UE's victory died so fast that Captain Santos did not even see it happen. "All ships, retreat and regroup," Admiral Rodriguez ordered. But her voice sounded like someone who knew the battle was already lost. Captain Santos watched half the human fleet die in the first 10 minutes of fighting. The aliens were not just better than humans. They were so much better that the fight felt like children throwing rocks at gods. But something strange happened as the human ships began to retreat. Lieutenant Torres, the pilot of a small fighter craft called the Mosquito, had run out of missiles and had nothing left to lose. Instead of running away, he pointed his ship directly at the nearest alien vessel and pushed his engines to maximum power. "This is Torres," he said over the radio. "If I'm going to die, I'm taking one of them with me." The Mosquito struck the alien ship at full speed. The fighter craft was destroyed instantly, turned into a cloud of metal and fire. But for just a moment, something impossible happened. The perfect darkness of the alien hull flickered. A brief flash of light appeared where the ship had been hit, like a stone thrown into dark water. On the Korthak flagship, Science Officer Velinara was studying her instruments when an alarm began to sound. She looked at the data streaming across her screen and felt something she had not experienced in years: confusion. "Commander," she called to Zeftai. "I'm reading a momentary shield fluctuation on ship 77 Alpha." Zeftai turned to look at her. "Explain." One of the human ships struck 77 Alpha directly. The shield held, but there was a brief power drain that does not match our normal absorption patterns. Zeftai considered this information. In 300 years of conquest, Korthak shields had never fluctuated. They absorbed energy perfectly and completely, no matter what struck them. Equipment malfunction, he decided. Have the ship run a full diagnostic, but Velinara was still watching her screens. 2 more human ships had followed Torres's example and rammed alien vessels at full speed. Each time, the same thing happened. The human ship died, the alien ship survived, but for just a moment, the shields flickered. It was such a small thing that anyone else might have missed it. But Velinara was a scientist, and scientists noticed small things that did not fit the pattern. She began to run quiet scans on the shield systems, looking for answers to a question she was not sure she wanted to ask. For the first time in her career, she was seeing something that should not exist: Korthak shields that were not perfect. Above Earth, the surviving human ships regrouped and prepared for another hopeless attack. They had learned that their weapons were useless, But they had also learned something else. The aliens could be touched. Somehow, in some way, they could be hurt. It was not much hope, but it was enough to keep fighting. The alien ships hung in Earth's sky like dark clouds that promised storms. For 2 days, they had waited above the planet while governments tried to contact them and armies prepared for war. Then, without warning, they began to descend, the first. Landing ships touched down in major cities across the globe. London, New York, Tokyo, Moscow, and 50 other population centers suddenly found themselves hosting visitors from another world. The ships were smooth and dark, like drops of liquid metal that had hardened into perfect shapes. In New York City, people stood on rooftops and looked up at the ship that had landed in Central Park. It was bigger than a city block and taller than most buildings. Steam rose from the ground where its engines had touched the earth, and the air around it shimmered with heat and energy. Marcus Chun was not supposed to be there. The army had ordered all civilians to evacuate the city, but Marcus was a paramedic and he could not leave while people might need help. He crouched behind an overturned car 3 blocks from the landing site and watched through binoculars as the alien ship opened. The first thing that came out was the smell. It was sharp and metallic, like the air after lightning strikes. Then came the sound, a low humming that seemed to vibrate in Marcus's bones. Finally came the aliens themselves. They were tall and thin, walking on 2 legs like humans, but different in ways that made Marcus's skin crawl. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and their skin had a pale blue color that seemed to glow with its own light. Their eyes were larger than human eyes and completely black, like holes cut in their faces. But the strangest thing about them was that they seemed to be wearing nothing at all, yet bullets bounced off them like they were made of steel. The first soldiers to engage the aliens were a squad of Marines who had taken position behind concrete barriers. Sergeant Williams gave the order to fire when the aliens were 50 meters away. 20 rifles opened up at once, sending hundreds of bullets toward the enemy. The bullets struck the aliens and stopped. They did not penetrate, did not ricochet, did not even seem to slow down. They just stopped in mid-air around each alien body, hanging there for a moment before falling harmlessly to the ground. "What the hell?" Sergeant Williams whispered. The aliens continued walking forward as if nothing had happened. When they reached the concrete barriers, they simply stepped over them. One of the Marines tried to stab an alien with his bayonet. The blade stopped 6 inches from the creature's chest, held back by invisible force. The alien looked down at the Marine with its black eyes. Then it reached out with one of its 4 hands and touched the man's forehead. The Marine fell to the ground and did not move again. Marcus watched in horror as the scene repeated itself across the city. Human weapons were completely useless against the invaders. Tanks fired shells that disappeared against alien bodies without leaving a mark. Attack helicopters launched missiles that vanished like raindrops hitting a window. Even a desperate fighter pilot who tried to crash his plane into a group of aliens saw his aircraft crumple against their shields while they continued walking without breaking stride. The aliens moved through New York like they owned it. They walked down streets while police cars and military vehicles burned around them. They stepped through buildings like the walls were made of paper. They seemed completely unstoppable, but Marcus had been a paramedic for 8 years, and paramedics learned to think fast when everything went wrong. He had seen the aliens' weapons work, and he had seen their shields stop every human attack. But he had also noticed something that made him think. The aliens were not trying to kill everyone. They were capturing people instead. When they touched someone, that person fell unconscious but kept breathing. They were collecting humans like farmers collecting livestock. This meant they wanted humans alive. And if they wanted humans alive, they probably would not use weapons that could destroy whole cities. They needed to get close to do their work. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He left his hiding spot and began moving toward the aliens. He was not the only one. All across the city, people who had refused to run were watching the aliens work. Some of them were soldiers who had run out of ammunition. Some were police officers who had seen their weapons fail. Some were just ordinary people who were too angry or too scared to keep hiding. A construction worker named Jake Murphy was one of them. He had been building a new office tower when the aliens landed, and he had watched from the 20th floor as they destroyed an entire army unit without taking a single casualty. Jake was a big man with hands like hammers from 20 years of construction work. He had never been in the military, never learned to fight with weapons, but he knew how to use his fists. When Jake saw an alien walking alone down the street below his building, he made a choice that defied logic. He took the elevator down to street level and stepped outside to face an enemy that had just proven it was invincible. The alien saw him coming. It stopped walking and watched with its black eyes as Jake approached. It probably thought this was just another human to collect, another mind to touch and body to claim. Jake was 20 feet away when he broke into a run. The alien did not move. It had faced charging humans before. It had seen them fire weapons and throw grenades and crash vehicles. None of it had ever mattered, but Jake Murphy was not carrying a weapon. He was not trying to shoot or stab or explode. He was just a very angry man who had watched his city burn and decided to hit something. Jake's right fist, powered by 200 pounds of muscle and bone and 20 years of hard labor and a lifetime of New York attitude, slammed into the alien's face. The punch connected. The alien staggered backward, blue blood flowing from what might have been a nose. It touched its face with one of its 4 hands and looked at the blood with an expression that might have been surprised. Jake stared at his fist. Then he looked at the alien. Then he smiled for the first time since the invasion began. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. 3 blocks away, Marcus Chun was running toward his own alien target. He had seen Jake's punch through his binoculars, and he understood what it meant. The shields that stopped bullets and bombs and missiles could not stop. A simple human fist. All across New York City, the word began to spread. The aliens could be punched. After all the failed weapons and useless technology, the answer was something humans had been doing since the dawn of time. The aliens were about to learn why humans had conquered their own world with nothing but determination and the willingness to hit things that needed hitting. The real fight was just beginning. The message spread faster than any virus in human history. Within 1 hour of Jake Murphy's punch, every phone, radio, and internet connection on Earth was carrying the same 3 words: punches work, fight. In London, a police officer named David Park had been hiding in an abandoned shop when the message reached him on his radio. He looked out the window at the aliens walking through his neighborhood and felt something he had not felt in days. Hope. David stepped out onto the street and walked toward the nearest alien. The creature turned to face him with those black, emotionless eyes. David had been a boxer in college, and his hands still remembered how to form proper fists. When he was close enough, he threw the best right hook of his life. The alien went down. In Tokyo, a group of factory workers had been trapped in their building for 2 days. When they heard the news, they looked at each other and began to smile. They had been making car parts with their hands for 20 years. Their fists were hard and their arms were strong. The workers burst out of their factory and ran toward the aliens in the street. The creatures raised their weapons, but the humans were already too close. 30 sets of human knuckles met alien flesh, and 30 aliens fell to the ground. In Moscow, an old woman named Anya Volkov heard the news on her grandson's phone. She was 83 years old and had lived through wars and famines and revolutions. She had seen tanks roll through her city and planes drop bombs on her neighbors. But she had never seen invaders who could be stopped with something as simple as a punch. Anya walked outside and found an alien standing in her garden. She was not strong anymore, and her hands were weak with age. But she had survived everything. The world could throw at her, and she was not about to let some blue-skinned monster take her planet. Without a fight, her small fist connected with the alien's stomach. The creature doubled over in pain and fell to its knees. Anya looked down at it and shook her head. "Pathetic," she said in Russian. The pattern repeated itself in every city where the aliens had landed. Humans who had been hiding came out of there. Shelters, soldiers who had run out of ammunition, threw down their useless guns and picked up their fists instead. Police officers, firefighters, construction workers, teachers, parents, and children all discovered the same thing. They could hurt the invaders, but the aliens were learning too. On the Korthak flagship, Science Officer Velinara stared at her. Screens in complete confusion. The reports coming from the surface made no sense at all. Korthak warriors who had never been touched by any weapon in 3 centuries of war were being knocked unconscious by primitive creatures using nothing but their bare hands. "Commander," she called to Zeftai, "I need to speak with you immediately." Zeftai was studying tactical displays that showed his ground forces retreating from positions they should have held easily. Red markers indicated wounded warriors, something that had not appeared on Korthak battle maps for generations. "Report," he commanded, his voice sharp with anger. "The humans have discovered that physical contact can penetrate our shields," Velinara sighed carefully. "Specifically, strikes delivered with their clenched hands appear to bypass our defensive systems completely." Zeftai turned to stare at her. "That is impossible. Our shields have been tested against every form of kinetic attack. They can stop projectiles moving at light speed." "Yes, Commander, but those projectiles were artificial. Bullets, missiles, and energy beams all follow predictable patterns. The shields analyze their frequency and mass and create exact counterforces." Velinara touched her data tablet and brought up readings from the surface battles. "Human biological systems generate electrical fields that change constantly based on their emotional state. When combined with the kinetic force of muscle contractions, they create a signature too chaotic for our shields to process." The explanation was correct, but it sounded insane. The most advanced defensive technology in the galaxy was being defeated by creatures punching with their bare hands. "How many warriors have been affected?" Zeftai asked. 47 confirmed casualties in the last hour, Velinara replied. "The numbers are increasing rapidly as more humans learn about the weakness." On Earth, the knowledge was spreading like wildfire. Social media posts showed ordinary people walking up to aliens and knocking them out with single punches. News broadcasts that had been showing nothing but destruction and defeat suddenly filled with stories of human victory. Marcus Chun had become one of those stories. After seeing Jake Murphy's punch work, he had spent the day moving through New York and taking down aliens one by one. He was not a big man, and he was not a trained fighter, but he had something the aliens did not understand: the human ability to get angry, enough to punch things that needed punching. Each time Marcus hit an alien, he felt a little bit of his world coming back. Every fallen invader meant one less creature walking through his city like it owned the place. By sunset, he had personally defeated 12 aliens and had started teaching other people how to throw proper punches. "Keep your thumb on the outside," he told a group of teenagers who had found him near Times Square. "Hit with your knuckles, not your fingers. And remember, they can still hurt you with their weapons, so get close fast and hit hard." The teenagers nodded seriously and ran off to find their own aliens to fight. Marcus watched them go and felt something he had not expected to feel during an alien invasion: pride. But the aliens were adapting too. The surviving Korthak warriors on the surface had begun to work in groups, using their superior reach and speed to keep humans at a distance. They had also started using their energy weapons more freely, no longer concerned about capturing humans alive. The war was changing. Humans could hurt the aliens now, but the aliens were still faster, stronger, and better armed. The invaders had advantages that simple punching could not overcome. However, humans had something else the aliens did not understand. When humans discovered that they could fight back against something that had seemed unstoppable, they did not just get confident. They got creative. In cities around the world, people began to organize. Military units reformed around the idea of close combat instead of ranged weapons. Police departments started training officers in hand-to-hand fighting techniques. Civilians formed groups that could surround individual aliens and overwhelm them with multiple attackers. The most important change was psychological. For days, humans had felt helpless against enemies who seemed like gods of war. Now they knew. The aliens could be hurt, could be defeated, could be made to bleed blue blood and fall to the ground like any other living thing. The aliens were no longer invincible. They were just another enemy, and humans had been very good at fighting enemies for their entire history. In her laboratory on the flagship, Velinara continued her analysis of the shield failures. The more she studied the data, the more disturbed she became. The human attacks were not just bypassing the shields by accident. The biological signatures were so fundamentally different from artificial weapons that the shields could not even recognize them as attacks. 300 years of technological advancement had created a weapon that was useless against the most primitive form of combat in the galaxy. The Korthak had become so dependent on their shields that they had forgotten how to fight without them. For the first time since joining the military, Velinara wondered if her people were going to lose a war. The news reached every corner of the galaxy within a week. On distant worlds that had been conquered by the Korthak Empire, beings who had lived as slaves for generations heard something impossible. The invincible warriors could be touched, hurt, and defeated. On Zarian Prime, where the people had purple skin and 6 legs, a slave named Kethra heard the story from a smuggler who had been listening to human radio transmissions. The humans had discovered that Korthak shields could not stop physical attacks delivered by living beings. Kethra looked at his own 6 arms and realized something wonderful. If humans could punch through the shields, then anyone could. Within days, rebellion spread across the Korthak Empire like fire through dry grass. Slaves who had accepted their fate for centuries suddenly remembered what freedom felt like. The galaxy learned that the beings who had seemed like gods of war were just bullies with good technology. Commander Zeftai stood on his bridge and watched his empire crumble in real time. Red lights flashed on displays, showing every world under Korthak control. Rebellion here, uprising there, revolution everywhere. 300 years of conquest were falling apart because primitive humans had learned to make fists. Commander, Science Officer Velinara approached carefully. She had been avoiding him for days, afraid to deliver more bad news. We have lost contact with 17 colony worlds. The slave populations have overwhelmed our garrison forces. Zeftai did not turn around. He continued staring at the tactical display that showed the Earth hanging below them like a blue and white jewel. Such a small planet to cause so much destruction. What are our options? He asked quietly. We could retreat, Velinara suggested. Pull back to the core worlds and develop new defensive technologies. The rebellion will take time to organize across such distances. Or, Zeftai asked, though he already knew what she would say, orbital bombardment. Turn the entire surface of Earth into glass. Eliminate the source of the knowledge that is destroying our empire. Zeftai considered this option. It would be simple. A few hours of bombardment and the human species would be extinct. The knowledge of how to fight Korthak warriors would die with them. The empire could be rebuilt, but it would also mark the Korthak as genocidal killers in the eyes of the galactic community. Other major powers would intervene. Trade relationships would end. The empire might survive, but it would be isolated and hated. There is a third option, Zeftai said finally. Velinara waited for him to continue. I will go down to the surface myself and face their champions in single combat. If I can prove that Korthak's superiority exists beyond our technology, perhaps we can negotiate a settlement that preserves both our empire and their world." It was a desperate plan, but Zeftai was a desperate commander. He had spent his entire career believing that Korthak warriors were superior to all other beings in the galaxy. Their shields had made them seem invincible, but shields were just tools. Without them, he would prove that training and discipline could still overcome primitive emotion and chaos. The challenge was transmitted to Earth on all frequencies. Commander Zeftai of the Korthak Empire requested single combat with humanity's finest warrior. Winner would determine the fate of both worlds. Marcus Chen was working in a makeshift hospital in Central Park when the message came through. He had been helping treat wounded fighters when every radio and television on Earth began broadcasting the same transmission. The alien commander wanted to fight one human to settle everything. "It should be you," said Jake Murphy, who had become something of a celebrity since throwing the first successful punch. "You've taken down more of them than anyone else." Marcus shook his head. "I'm a paramedic, Jake. I save people. I don't represent them in fights to the death." But around the world, the same conversation was happening. Who should face the alien commander? Military leaders argued that it should be a trained soldier. Politicians suggested that it should be someone chosen by democratic vote. Scientists wanted time to study Korthak physiology and develop fighting strategies. In the end, the choice was made by the aliens themselves. Zeftai's ship landed in Times Square, and the commander emerged alone. He wore no shield generator and carried no weapons except for his 4 hands and whatever training he had received in the Korthak military. He was 8 feet tall and moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his life learning to fight. His pale blue skin seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight, and his black eyes looked completely confident despite everything that had happened to his forces. "I am Commander Zeftai," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the empty square. "I challenge the human species to send their greatest warrior to face me in combat. The winner will determine the terms of peace between our peoples." Marcus found himself walking forward before he had consciously decided to move. He was not the biggest human, or the strongest, or the most trained. But he had been fighting aliens for a week while trying to save lives, and something about the commander's arrogant tone made him angry. "I'm Marcus Chen," he called back. "I guess I'll do." Zeftai looked at the small human standing across from him. Marcus was 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed about 170 pounds. He had no military training and no special equipment. He looked like exactly what he was, an ordinary person who had been thrust into extraordinary circumstances. "You cannot be serious," Zeftai said. "Send me a real warrior. I am a real warrior," Marcus replied. "I've been fighting your people all week. You want to fight a human? You got one." The two beings faced each other in the middle of Times Square while the world watched. Zeftai had 4 arms, superior reach, enhanced speed, and decades of combat training. Marcus had 2 fists and a week of experience punching aliens, but Marcus also had something that Zeftai did not understand. He had spent the last week watching his world burn and his people suffer. He had seen children hiding in basements while alien invaders walked through their neighborhoods. He had treated wounded fighters who had thrown themselves at impossible odds because it was the right thing to do that. Marcus was not fighting for glory, or conquest or empire. He was fighting for the simple right to exist without permission from anyone else. The fight began when Zeftai rushed forward, all 4 arms moving in perfect coordination. He was faster than any human could be, and his reach advantage should have ended the fight in seconds. But Marcus had learned something important during his week of alien punching. He had learned to move when scared, to think when overwhelmed, and to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless. Most importantly, he had learned that being smaller and weaker did not mean giving up. Marcus ducked under Zephty's first strike and landed a solid punch to the alien's ribs. The commander staggered but recovered quickly, spinning to catch Marcus with a backhand that sent the human flying across the square. Marcus got up. He always got up. That was what humans did. The fight continued for 20 minutes. Zephty was skilled and strong, but he had spent his career relying on shields to protect him. He had forgotten what it felt like to receive damage, to feel pain, to fight an opponent who refused to stay down. Marcus was outmatched in every way except one. He would not quit. Every time Zephty knocked him down, he stood up again. Every time he got hit, he hit back. He bled and hurt and probably broke several bones, but he kept fighting. Finally, Zephty made a mistake. He became frustrated with his opponent's refusal to stay defeated and overextended himself on a strike meant to end the fight. Marcus slipped inside the alien's guard and delivered an uppercut that had all of his remaining strength behind it. Zephty fell and did not get up. Marcus stood over the fallen commander, breathing hard and bleeding from a dozen wounds. Around him, Times Square erupted in cheering from humans who had been watching from every window and rooftop. "Do we have a deal?" Marcus asked the alien. Zephty looked up at the small human who had just defeated him in fair combat. For the first time in his life, he understood what humans possessed that Korthak warriors had lost somewhere in their centuries of technological dominance. "We have a deal," he said quietly. The Korthak fleet left Earth that same day. The Empire retreated to its core worlds to face the rebellions that were spreading across the galaxy. Humanity was recognized as a sovereign species and invited to join the galactic community as equals. Marcus Chun returned to his job as a paramedic. He had saved his world with nothing but determination and the willingness to punch things that needed punching. It seemed like the most human thing he could have done, years later when humans spread across the galaxy and met other species. They were known for many things: their technology, their art, their ability to adapt and survive. But most of all, they were known as the species that had looked at an impossible situation and decided to fix it. With their bare hands, the galaxy learned to respect that kind of thinking.